Welcome, everyone. I'd like to thank everyone for their time to attend the event here with CanWCC's Beyond Border panel. My name is Catherine Chan. My pronouns are she, her, elle. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at the Canadian Women's Chamber of Commerce, aka CanWCC for short. For some of you who don't maybe know us, until you register for this event, let me just do a really quick introduction to CanWCC. So we are the first and only Chamber of Commerce in Canada, nationwide, that advocates for the 1.2 million women and non-binary business owners, which includes self-employed individuals. Our mission, very simply, is advancing gender and economic equity. And since we work across Turtle Island, I'd also like to read our land acknowledgement. So, CanWCC acknowledges that our head office is located on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We encourage our team and our community to take the time to learn about colonialism's legacy and engage in active reconciliation. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator, PK Much. She is an award-winning sustainability activist, entrepreneur, and former C-suite publishing executive at both McGraw-Hill Canada and John Wiley & Sons New York. She's a freelance journalist, a writer, an adjunct faculty, plus she's currently pursuing her PhD in entrepreneurship and social movements at the Lang School of Business at the University of Guelph. PK is deeply committed to creating an inclusive, just, post-growth economy by transforming entrepreneurship narratives, policy, ecosystems, and education. Part of how she does that is she serves on CanWCC's board. You can follow PK's writing at rabble.ca, on LinkedIn, where she posts frequently, or you can also sign up for her infrequent but very juicy newsletter at pkmuch.com. Take it away, PK.
Oh, thank you so much, Catherine. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for signing up to spend an hour and a half with us this afternoon. I think this is a super important session because of all the talking we've had over the last 42 days. It's only 42 days into the year 2025. Can you believe it? Feels like a lot longer, right? But in all the tariff conversations we've been having, from many points of view, no one has centered the impact on women. And when CanWCC says women, when we say women, we mean all women, inclusive of trans and non-binary genders as well. Okay. All right. So the way we're going to do this today is we want you to get to know a little about our panelists a little bit before we get into deep dive into the big questions. So I'm just going to start off by introducing each panelist and asking them to talk about what's keeping them up at night over the last 42 days. What are they thinking about? And so let me start with Jim. Jim, I wasn't going to start with Jim. I was going to start with Celina. Let me start with Celina. Sorry, there, I'm going to flip right over there. Celina Caesar-Chavannes is the Executive Director of the Canadian Community Economic Development Network, known as CCEDnet. She is also a successful entrepreneur with up to 3 companies, including Resolve Research Solutions, a research management consulting firm. She's been a tech entrepreneur, and she was awarded Business Entrepreneur of the Year in 2012. She is also, the PhD thing is kind of a thing. Have we all drunk the same water? I don't know. But she is also pursuing a PhD as a candidate at Queen's University in neuroscience, an area that she's been studying and really involved with for the last, I don't know, decade and a half or longer. And she is the author of a book, Can You Hear Me Now? We highly recommend it, published by Random House. She is the former member of parliament and former parliamentary secretary to Prime Minister Trudeau. And she is also the first Black person elected to federal parliament in the region of Durham in Canada's history, and only the second to be a parliamentary secretary to the Canadian Prime Minister. And to top it all off, and this is what I love about your bio the most, is you were featured in one of Oprah Winfrey's, I think it was a publication or something like that, right? Like, how cool is that? So Celina, what is keeping you up at night these days?
So thank you very much, PK. Thank you to the organizers for having me here today. I think what's keeping me up at night, or I think what really keeps a lot of people up at night is community and the people that are going to be most impacted, the people who are currently sitting at the nexus of climate change, a pandemic, geopolitical issues, and most often those people look like me. And so tariffs aren't just about trade policy shifts, they're an economic weapon. And like most economic weapons, they don't hit everybody equally. And Black women in particular are the fastest growing segment of entrepreneurs in North America. I know this because I'm studying it as part of my PhD. And when the fires hit, they get caught in the crossfire. So imagine a woman running a small business in Canada, importing textiles or products or tech components. She's already struggling to secure funding because the financial system sees women as high risk borrowers. Now tariffs jack up her costs and she has two choices: eat the cost and sink, or pass it on to her customers and risk losing them. Either way, she's losing in the long run and in the short run. So let's be real. When governments talk about economic resilience, who are they really talking about? Because they're not talking about the women that are at the intersection of those various different disruptions. And they're certainly not talking about the growing number of Black women scaling up or starting up their business. And they're not talking about the immigrant mother running her home-based business. They're not talking about the entrepreneur who, despite being the backbone of this economy, are treated as an afterthought in policy decisions. So tariffs come with a plan to support the very businesses that we feel the brunt of. Those businesses feel the most. And without a proper structure, without proper consideration, without an intersectional feminist lens looking at them, then this is not just going to be an economic attack. It is going to hit women's financial independence in a more severe way than we've seen in a very long time.
Okay, thank you so much. I can see you have not been getting a lot of sleep based on all of those important, like super important concerns. And let me turn over to Jim Stanford now. Jim, you are a well-known Canadian labor economist, a researcher, thinker, writer, and analyst. His work includes serving Canada's largest trade union, Unifor. He is the founder of the Progressive Economics Forum, and he currently serves as the director of the Center of Future Work. He holds a master's in economics from Cambridge and a doctorate from the New School for Social Research. He is also the author of a column for the Globe and Mail, and I believe you're also write for the Toronto Star and, of course, Rabble.ca. So you can find Jim in a number of publications. So welcome, Jim. And I just wanted to say thank you for stepping in for Armin today. Armin Yalnizan could not join us, unfortunately, because of a family situation, but we are so delighted that you were able to step in and really appreciate this, that you're doing so on such short notice. So thank you. So what has been keeping you up at night?
Well, PK, thank you very much, and also to the Canadian Women's Chamber of Commerce for the outstanding work that you're doing, promoting equity in the world of the economy and entrepreneurship, and it's a privilege for me. I'll never be able to fill Armin's shoes, I'll tell you that much, but I'll do my best. Now, it's funny that you ask an economist about what keeps you up at night, because economics is known as the dismal science, and that term is well-deserved, especially when everything's going crazy in the world as it is right now. So, I mean, naturally, I'm worrying and thinking through at night the economic implications of Trump's tariff war. What is it going to mean for Canada, for our export industries? But it won't stop at just the export industries that are affected. If he goes ahead, it will filter through the whole economy, including the small business sector, where your CanWCC members are devoting their lives and energies. I worry about what it all means for democracy and peace, really, because what we're seeing Trump doing is centralizing power where he can wake up any day of the week and just write an executive order. And we're feeling one piece of his attacks in Canada on the economic and trade front. But look at everything else that he's doing, around government programs and policies, the civil service, international relations, war, these horrible things that he's been coming out and saying about Gaza and Ukraine and everything else, and repression within the US, of course, including of women and trans and non-binary people and everything else. So that's a huge worry. Maybe the one that I'll mention, PK in particular, is I do think a lot about how are we going to respond in Canada. I do think this is an existential challenge, not just to our economy, but to our sovereignty and our democracy. And I think that caring Canadians, including the folks on this call, have to step up to the occasion. This is a moment where history is calling us. And I know that I was involved, as was our fellow panelist, Judy Rebick, way back in the 1980s in some of the battles against the original free trade agreement with the United States at that time. And we had a concern, you know, that looks pretty accurate in hindsight, that the closer economic ties with the United States without adequate protections would eventually undermine our sovereignty and push for a kind of a bigger harmonization. And we're seeing that. Now, at that time in the 80s, I will say we had an amazing coming together of all kinds of social constituencies and movements and non-profit organizations, trade unions, feminists. The feminist movement was right in the middle of it. And just formed a really big coalition at that time to do some education work and outreach and try to convince Canadians that there were other ways to build our economy than just hitching our wagon to the US. And, you know, I mean, ultimately we lost the debate in the election. We actually won the debate. Most people in that 88 election voted against free trade, but the way our system works, the government came in and we got it. But it was, I think, testimony to how powerful a kind of intersectional cross-stakeholder alliance can be. And I think that we need the same thing right now. And I'm worried that I don't see it yet. So one of the many things that keeps this dismal economist up at night is just thinking, how are we going to inspire and organize and mobilize Canadians enough to stand up to what these threats mean for us and fight together for something better?
All right, thank you. I can tell you, when I say I can tell you've been up, not getting too much sleep, I'm not talking about you, how you look. I'm talking about the worries you have on your respective minds. Okay, I just want to say that. Thank you for that, Jim. Thank you for those comments. Let me move over to Vasanthi. Vasanthi Venkatesh is a lawyer, a PhD candidate as well, and an advocate for migrant workers, refugees, and immigration overall. She is an assistant professor in law and land and local economies at University of California, Berkeley. Her research focuses on law and social movements, citizenship, and immigration. And if you Google Vasanthi, you will see pictures of her carrying placards. She is right down, kind of like Judy, in the trenches, joining marches and really doing grassroots advocacy as well as other forms of advocacy. So Vasanthi, what is keeping you up at night?
Yeah, thanks so much, PK. I just want to say, I think you got an old bio of mine. It's been years since I got my PhD, and I'm now an associate professor of law, land, and local economies at University of Windsor at the Faculty of Law.
Okay, thank you for that.
That's all right. But I have to say, though, I've been up at night for a long time, far, far before the Trump presidency. And what I think is that Trump's, what we might call tin pot dictator tactics aren't an anomaly. They've been part of a long history of trade policies that have prioritized the powerful and neocolonial power. And racialized women, trans, non-binary, and other LGBTQ plus persons here, and especially in the global South, have always borne the brunt. And as Celina said, tariffs aren't economic tools, they're political weapons. And we can see how it's a weapon because of the way border and immigration policies are very much at the front and center of it. And tariffs, whether carrots like preferential tariffs, which Canada has engaged in for a long time, or sticks like these US ones that we are seeing, have always been used to manipulate states, manufacture crises, and deepen inequality. And we should not forget the settler colonial and colonial roots of trade policies in general. So take agriculture, for example, where Justicia works centrally. It's a protected, subsidized industry in Canada and throughout the global North, which is propped up by migrant labor. And these Canadian subsidies for large Canadian farmers decimate farming in the global South, creating what Du Bois has called the vast dark sea of labor that can be exploited in Canada economically, physically, and sexually. And the cycle continues. So I think what we'll be seeing is increased subsidies for corporations in the name of Canada First that are going to deeply affect those who do small income generation and those who engage in precarious labor. So I think we really need to understand that these consequences stretch far beyond Canada, that are going to favor corporate capital while crushing the most vulnerable, and that includes women in the global south that we need to be concerned about, women workers in precarious and legally exceptionalized sectors, often called the informal economy, and those with precarious status. So I just want to say that for racialized women, and this is all over the world, again, this isn't about competition, this isn't about the US, this isn't about Trump, it's about survival. And these policies are designed to push them deeper into precarious work and economic insecurity, and to exacerbate inequalities both within Canada and globally. So we need to ask who really pays the price. And we need to look at it not from just a Canadian perspective, but from a global perspective. And we need to recognize that while profits flow to the top, the cost is paid by those who have already struggled to survive and who have struggled to survive since there has been colonialism.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Vasanthi. Okay, last but not least, Judy Rebick. Let me do a brief introduction of Judy. Judy is a celebrated journalist and political activist, well-known feminist. She actually was born in Reno, and she came to prominence in Canada as the pro-choice leader back in the 80s and an advocate for women's rights. And from 1990 to 93, she was president of the National Action Committee for the Status of Women, and has also been on CBC, hosting a popular political debate show. And she is known for her wit and her passionate commitment to feminism. And I can vouch for that. I think everybody else can as well. She is also the author. I believe it's up to 8 books now. You can correct me, Judy. I always get that a little bit wrong. But welcome, Judy. And what is keeping you up at night right now?
Well, I keep underestimating how serious this is. And so often I'll read something from an American comrade. I use the word comrade because it's gender neutral and it means a lot to me because I was part of a Marxist group when I was young, and comrade means people you work with, that you're comrades with. You don't necessarily have to be friends, right? But you're working together, you have common goals. And I think comrade's a very important word right now, even though it might alienate some people. So I want to say that I agree with a lot of what everybody else has said, but I want to talk about what Jim's point about building as broad an alliance as we can. It's one reason I'm here. Like, some people are surprised that I work with the Chamber of Commerce. I've been working with CanWCC for a couple of years now. And what we tried to do is, and did do, was create a coalition that would include unions and entrepreneurs, unions and a chamber of commerce. This is unheard of, right? Like, usually unions and chambers of commerce have opposite interests. But Nancy realized very early that her members were not like big business, and they didn't have common interests with big business. They were 80% of women entrepreneurs don't even have a single employee. They're workers. They're not waged workers. So as Vasanthi pointed out, and I think Celina also, they don't get any benefits, very few benefits, right? Nobody talks about them. Nobody thinks about them. Because they're women and they're racialized, right? And so and these are the same people that are getting hurt. And then the second thing is, this is the biggest backlash to feminism we've ever seen. And I've seen a few, I was around when Maclean's magazine had the headline, "Feminism, the F word," okay? So I have seen some backlashes against feminism, but not like this. Like, I saw these guys, these .com bros, they hate the fact that women get ahead in the world. They want only men to dominate. It really is. If you read anything they write, it's really true. Okay. And they're all men. He has a few women up front as mouthpieces, but it's a white male backlash against women and against racialized people, against immigrants, against Black people, especially in the United States, but also internationally. And so that's what keeps me up, because all the work I've done my whole life, right, since the 60s, when I marched in solidarity with Selma, for Christ's sake. That's how old I am, They're trying to push that back. They're trying to push all the gains that we've made back. That's what's really happening, right? And we can't allow that to happen. And globally, I think the global South is going to rise up against this as they attempt to as they're doing the damage, And there's already terrible damage, and they've stopped aid. U.S. imperialism. I'll end here because I'm making a speech, and I'm not. U.S. imperialism, it's the fist and the rose, we'll feed you, but if you misbehave, we'll bomb you, That's U.S. imperialism. That's always how they've operated, right? Well, they're stopping the rose, they're stopping the food, they're stopping the aid. We don't know what the result of that's going to be. I think it could be a global uprising against them. That would be very nice. The problem is, from my perspective, the left is weak everywhere, not just here.
Mhm.
And one of the reasons the left is weak is because we stopped talking to each other.
Mm-hmm.
We, if I'm for this, when I tell people I work with the Canadian Women's Chamber of Commerce now, I think I have some credibility. They laugh. Like they say, oh, come on. I'm saying these people are more progressive than, sometimes more radical than anybody I ever talked to, right? And so we have to talk to each other. We have to work together. We have to identify our commonalities. And we have to support, as Vasanthi said, the weakest amongst, not weakest, but the most oppressed amongst us. And I've been shocked by how many, like, it's immigrants who don't have status except as workers, as indentured, I think. I mean, Vasanthi can correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of the people who grow our food, who pick our food, they are indentured labor, right? They have to work for a certain employer, and there's thousands and thousands of them. And that's why I think it's important that Vasanthi and her organization is here, because we need to support them and work with them. And so I don't want, Canada, it looks like our government's standing up to the US, but I want them to stand up and make our capitalists richer. No, that's not what we want. We want we have an opportunity here to change our economy, and we have to talk about how we're going to do that. I'm going to end with a quote from one of PK has salons with women entrepreneurs. And this one woman said in one of the salons, she said, commerce preceded capitalism. We don't have to follow the dictates of capitalism to be entrepreneurs. We can do it on a feminist basis, on a social justice basis, on an anti-racist basis. And we have a chance to do that. So that's what inspires me right now. This is a chance to start putting that forward and to do that. And it's not an accident that CanWCC, a chamber of commerce, is the first organization in the country to have a meeting talking about the impact of the tariffs on women. And that tells you something about how things are changing.
Thank you, Judy. I think I can speak for all of us based on what I see in the webinar and the chat here, that warms. And also, I mean, it's just thank you for all the words, and thank you all for all the words. What a great way to start this panel off. And yeah, goosebumps by all of you. I think you should all run for office.
Yeah, so
actually, I think Celina already did.
Sorry.
You can talk to Celina about that. All right. I want to get a little more into people's homes with the next question. When we've talked about women, we've talked about the tariff, we've talked about women entrepreneurs and diverse women, and with people who are excluded and at the margins. But let's go a little bit deeper. I want to just mention a couple of numbers, because I find a lot of folks don't actually know what how many women entrepreneurs do we have. They often count them in terms of number of incorporated entities, right? We say, 18% of businesses are majority women owned, et cetera, which adds up to about 230 or 250,000 businesses. That's not the whole picture. The whole picture is that at present, Canada has about 11% of the working population, or 1 million, as Catherine already said, are self-employed women or women entrepreneurs. And even for all entrepreneurs, whether they're male or whatever gender, the vast majority, 80% or more, are micro entrepreneurs, right? Companies of one and maybe 1 to 4. So, and this is consistent with other, how small business works over a broader landscape. And we kind of we obfuscate the small micro businesses in our language around SMEs. So we have 1 million women out there who are self-employed or women entrepreneurs, if we want to call them that. The majority of them operate in professional services. They operate in food, tourism, education, and healthcare. And those are some of the top categories. And we also do have about over 500,000 women working in manufacturing sectors that are directly hit by the tariffs that are coming our way. So I'm going to ask the panelists to, and whoever wants to go first, just raise your hand. How do you think the tariffs will impact women in our economy, sort of right down on the ground, their businesses? Who are they? Who's going to hire them? Who are they not going to be able to serve? I think it was Celina who already said prices may go up. And if they raise their prices in commensuration with what it needs to be to still earn a living, then they may lose their customers. And I also want to remind people that some studies, and there hasn't been enough studies on this, but there are enough to quote, the average woman entrepreneur, and I said average, which means, you know what average means, takes home about $60,000 a year. There are many who do far less and many who do far more, but that's about on par with the salary of a good social worker. We think of entrepreneurs as Elon Musks of the future. They're not. They are a different kind of worker. So who wants to address that? What does it look like on the ground for women, and also for marginalized women and other marginalized folks in their pocketbooks, in their kitchen? What is it going to feel like? Okay, don't all jump at once. Okay.
I'll jump in because I don't like the silence. It makes me uncomfortable. But I think what it looks like is what it currently looks like and what it could continue to look like for most of these women, to be honest with you. And I don't want us to pretend that women who have these often marginalized intersecting identities are thriving right now post-pandemic. So we are in a post-pandemic, and now we're talking about tariffs, and they're still really struggling. And so you have to remember that when you talk about being in food or tourism or healthcare, the individuals that you're talking about right now were most impacted by the pandemic, meaning hospitalization, sickness, and death. So those families are already struggling with those impacts, the impacts of gender-based violence, the impacts of children childcare expenses, things like that, that they already just sort of coming out of or surviving from. And now we're here again with another existential threat to their humanity. And I want to just, before I answer the question, really underscore what Judy said in her response around this Buy Canada strategy. We have to be very careful. Everybody is shedding a tear over Buy Canada. But when we talk about Buy Canada, let's not just talk about making McCain's and Sobeys more rich. Let's really make sure that we're talking about those ones who we know have been really challenged, and the ones who have really supported our economy at a time when we need it. I'm sorry, I'm getting emotional. Again, this is the second panel, but the ones who have supported our economy when nobody else was, when the pandemic was killing them. And now you want to talk about Buy Canada and not talk about an intersectional approach to doing that, not talk about the fact that we should support Black, Indigenous, and women of color entrepreneurs who have already been locked out of traditional funding streams. Increased costs don't just hurt their wallets, it hurts their families, it hurts their communities, it hurts everybody around them. Those higher costs means fewer sales, lost jobs, in some cases shutting down completely. Women with disabilities who rely on medical supplies, assisted devices, specialized products. Tariffs make these things more expensive. What about their well-being? What about their joy? When we talk about wage versus self-employed women, women who I work in the neurological industry for a very long time, who are often caregivers, unpaid labor. When they take a direct hit and they're choosing between lights and food and rent or mortgage, where are the supports for them? And immigrant women, again, backbone of our communities here. The aunties of our communities, the shops, the food services, the home-based ventures that are heavily dependent on the imported foods. Higher costs means that they have lower profit margins and fewer opportunities to grow. So when we talk about these tariffs juxtaposed against a pandemic, compacted further with climate change, intersected with other geopolitical issues that are going on, the tariffs is not the only things that are happening in the world. Let us not forget. We're not just talking about disruptive economies, we're talking about continuing to widen the gap of inequality that has already existed. And if we're serious about supporting women, we don't need policies that just fix the problem after the fact, but we need to prevent the damage in the first place. And I think we're already miles behind. So Canadians really need to pull up. This is the second day on the second panel that I'm saying it. Pull up. We don't need allies. We need, or people that are just going to come with us when we're going to war. We need people who are actually going to be our friends, who are going to support those businesses in as much as they support everybody else, but also supporting those volunteer sector organizations that are the real spine of our communities that hold us together and are forgotten in this economic conversation because they're volunteer led and they're volunteer run.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much, Celina. Thank you. All right. Anyone else want to talk about what's happening on the ground for women entrepreneurs and, what can they expect to see happen? Are they going to see sales decline? Are they going to find it harder to find customers?
PK, maybe I could jump in just with a bit of the narrative in terms of how this is going to flow through the whole economy and how women entrepreneurs and other women workers are going to be affected by it. Obviously, the first impact of a U.S. tariff is to make Canadian exports to the U.S. market more expensive, 25% more expensive, if he goes ahead with the 25% tariff on virtually everything. He said only 10% for energy. That's because they really need our energy, but they need the other stuff that we sell them too. So if you were a woman entrepreneur running a firm that did sell products to the US, and there is more of that happening because of online commerce and so on, more small entrepreneurs are able to reach further afield markets. You are going to be affected by that. Your products are going to look 25% more expensive than they were before. And it's important to note that the U.S. rule would apply to small shipments, even one-offs. So there had been, exemptions for the small scale trade where you make an online order just to get one or two things. But the Americans have confirmed that those would be covered by the 25% tariff as well. So everyone knows, of course, if your product becomes 25% more expensive, then you're likely to lose a significant share of your sales. So that's the first impact. Now, most entrepreneurs are not exporters. That's just the reality, especially very small ones that haven't been able to set up a network. But that doesn't mean that they're not going to be affected as well for various reasons. Number one, it was already mentioned, the costs of inputs that are used by businesses, everything that you have to buy, many of those will be affected by the tariffs, either directly because Canada put countervailing tariffs on, or even indirectly because you're using stuff that you purchased from the United States, but that was affected by the price of the US tariffs. The greatest irony is it's US businesses that are going to feel the pain first and foremost from Trump's own tariffs, because they're the ones who have to pay that initial tariff. But that will flow through into the input costs that entrepreneurs of all kinds have to pay, including small and women entrepreneurs. Then I suspect that the biggest impact will be just the kind of chilling impact on the overall economy from this trade war. Small businesses in general, including the micro enterprises that many women entrepreneurs run, depend completely on the state of spending power in the domestic economy. So what is going to happen to consumer spending if a lot of the well-paying jobs in the export sector, are hurt by the trade war? It's going to have a filter-through effect into the rest of the economy, even for businesses that aren't directly exporting to the United States. So that's, in my view, from the economic perspective, that explains why so many women, not just those working in export industries, are going to be in a very vulnerable situation if this trade war goes ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. And just to follow on very quickly to that, Jim, in terms of service industries, I have heard other analysts say that it might cause a boon for entrepreneurs providing professional services or courses or consulting or stuff like that, because companies will be shedding some of their staff to save money and hiring back more and spending more on freelance or contract workers. Does that make sense to you as an economist?
I think somebody was really trying hard to see a silver lining there, PK. I don't follow the logic on that. I mean, first of all, women are going to be some of those laid off in the first place. Secondly, the chance that you might get hired back on a temporary or consulting basis doesn't sound like much compensation, frankly. And the reason companies would do that is for precisely, what Celina and Vasanthi were saying earlier about people in those precarious roles being, less expensive because they have no rights and they have no stability. So I sympathize with people trying to see the bright side here, but I don't think that was it.
All right, thank you for that. Vasanthi, let me go over to you. What are you seeing you did mention a little bit already, but anything to add to what does it look like on the ground for people in their daily lives?
Yeah, so as all of us Hustisha members, we try to change. We always change the conversation a bit. But as I said in my previous answer, I mean, it's not about trade. It's part of a broader system that weaponizes migration. And Tariff has publicly claimed that these tariffs are about. Trump has publicly claimed that these tariffs are about border control. But but this isn't a threat to Canada. It's a gift. Because even before the elections, the US elections, Canada has been scapegoating migrants for all its policy failures, from housing to healthcare to you just name it. And in March 2023, way before the elections, the Safe Third Country Agreement was extended across the entire US-Canada border, which makes the entire journey for desperate migrants even more perilous. And meanwhile, and this is before, in December itself, Canada has already invested $1.3 billion in border surveillance. So what that means is more CSIS, more CBSA officers, and more drones. And in fact, has promised to buy more US weapons to police borders. So the tariffs hasn't affected the weapons trade at all. So, and this isn't about security, because it's about framing racialized communities, especially women, as suspect bodies that have to be surveilled and controlled. And we see that not just at the border, at Roxham Road in Quebec, or at the Manitoba borders, where we read about the Venezuelan family and children trying to cross in the freezing cold, but within, in cities, in shelters, in housing, in workplaces. So for migrant women, what this would mean is being pushed into more precarious and hazardous jobs where injuries and employer reprisals will lead to loss of status. It'll mean facing more increased hate crimes, gendered violence, and exploitation. And in many ways, and this has been told before, the tariffs aren't just taxes on businesses. They're actually levies on migrants and immigrants who are already bearing the brunt of systemic inequality and entrenched racism. So, and immigration has always been a tool of this racial ordering. And now under the guise of security, this ordering is going to be entrenched even further. So even if we talk about Trump's Islamophobic rhetoric on immigration, it's already embedded in Canada. Like, look at the Gaza visa program. And the Gaza visa program is very much a feminist issue, given that it's a genocide against women and children. It is designed with far bigger barriers than for the program for Ukrainians. And this isn't about Gaza. It's about Sudan, Congo, Haiti, and all other regions where racialized women's bodies are cast as disposable and as collateral for so-called security. So what we should understand is this border weaponization isn't about keeping people out. It's about sacrificing racialized women to maintain a system that profits from their exploitation. And they are, because these women are seen to be economically disposable, they can be seen to be collateral damage. So what I would like to say is that if you want to challenge tariffs, we have to challenge the systems of border violence and racial capitalism that makes it possible, because it is not just something that is hidden, because the border issue is very much front and center of these tariffs, and we cannot ignore that.
All right.
Can
thank
we
you for
all
that.
bow down to
Yeah.
Vasanthi right now? Like,
Yeah.
what was that?
I
Just
think the whole audience is sending lots of to all of you, lots of hearts and claps. This is an amazing panel. And let me shift because we want to leave
Can I
time
just
for
say,
questions.
can I just add to something? here?
Yes. Yeah.
In relation to what Vasanthi is saying, I think Vasanthi is right. I think that we have been able, a lot of us have been able to not pay a lot of attention to what's happening to migrants and immigrants. You know, when I was reading up to in preparation for this, and the federal liberals made dozens of cuts resulting in 3,000 people losing their work or study permits. Like this whole thing against foreign students, right? Like this has been a major assault. The fact that they're ending the ability of foreign students to come, right? And they're cutting immigration costs and they're pumping up the border. And this is, so maybe the silver lining here, Vasanthi, is that we're all becoming a lot more aware. We're going to be a lot more aware of these injustices, right? They're much more visible to people. And the thing we have to watch is that the very positive mass reaction to this, which is to say, we don't want to be the United States. We don't want to be whatever it is, 51st state, because we don't like the way they do things there. That's a good thing. Doesn't become the bad thing of, yay, Canada, we're so great. We don't have any problems here. Everything's wonderful, right? So,
Right.
you know, so we have to combine. And that's why what I was saying about coalition is so important. Just having Vasanthi here with her experience is so important to the depth of our understanding of the problems, right? And you know, yeah, so I just wanted to add that.
I'm glad you did. I think we're all glad you did. Thank you, Judy. Okay, I'm going to kind of just meld the last question so we have time for some audience questions as well. I want to get to funding for a second because a lot of there has been a lot of funding, never enough. Okay, let's just say that. But in the last 8 years, we have had some, you know, more than ever, at least for women's entrepreneurship funding. We've had $8 billion through the West strategy. The wage ministry received something like 600 million, which doesn't sound like a lot. LGBTQ initiatives, anti-hate funding, and so forth, 110. And of course, we have childcare funding. Do you think that the political environment, the conversation, and you know the economic warfare that's happening could potentially reduce or roll back what I would call domestic funding of domestic feminist or you know women's advancement initiatives here? And of course, we already know it's declining around the world. So, any thoughts on future funding for women's equality, women's equity, women's advancement, and not just women, but also other marginalized groups?
Maybe I could take this one.
Yeah, go ahead, Judy.
Yeah, when I was president, I became president of the National Action Committee on the Status of Women in 1990, and I was a radical. And all the previous leaders, with one exception, had been like, you know, very middle of the road mainstream people, right? But they asked me to run, and you know, I'd been a leader of the pro-choice struggle and in the streets and so on, because they knew we have a fight on our hand when Brian Mulroney became prime minister and was going to bring in free trade. And we understood, as Jim said earlier, that free trade was going to hurt women, not just women workers, but hurt women generally across the board. And we were 100% government funded, okay? And I was Mulroney's like at least number 2 opposite opponent, you know, like that actually in the cartoons, they'd have me, you know, fighting the conservative government, right? Like we were really fighting them. And they never cut the funding when I was president or when Celina was president, because anyway, it's a different story. We fought racism and Celina, because she was also a strong leader, but then NAC became less strong, okay? And when it was weaker, the funding got cut, okay? So I think there will be cuts in funding because of you know, one thing I've learned over my life is that when anti-feminism rises, it has a lot of supporters in the you know, in the elites, right? And so I think that I have the same solution for this, which is the way in which we can ensure, there's 2 ways to ensure that funding cuts don't happen. One is to stand up and speak out and not be afraid to do that, right? To show that we have a role to play in society by pushing government, right? And the other is because we need to go to women, and there are, as we know, women in our communities to support women's group and racialized groups and immigrant groups. Like we have to challenge people who have wealth and who think of themselves as liberal or progressive to put their money where their mouth is. If there's a reaction here, I'm not sure I'm not sure how the reaction, because I'm a bit encouraged by the initial reaction to Trump saying he wants Canada to be the 51st state. But there is, you know, the people who led the Freedom Convoy, they're still around. And they know how to organize. They learned it from us, actually. But anyway, yeah, they know how to organize. And there's a chance that we'll see a bigger rise of the right than we've already seen. So far, it looks like it'll have the opposite effect. But things are changing so fast, we don't know. So I think it's time to tell women of wealth who aren't participating in supporting women's groups across and migrant groups and all the groups that are fighting for social justice and equality to step up.
Thank you, Judy. Now,
100%.
does anyone else want to? Oh, does anyone
Sorry,
else want to?
can I just?
Oh, yeah,
can I
go
just
ahead,
add
Celina.
that
Thank you.
Yeah, it's already started, in case we haven't been paying attention. And not like started from, it's already started like from a long time ago, but our good friend Pierre Poilievre said that he was going to cut Canada's foreign aid to pay for this military base in Iqaluit. Now, I don't know what percentage of our totally abysmal foreign aid budget is going to pay for all of this stuff, but let's just be clear, Pierre, it's not going to work. But I think what we need to pay attention to is the rhetoric that happens. And when we think about foreign aid, and one of the greatest jobs I never knew I wanted was being parliamentary secretary for international development, and being proud of sort of the work that we were doing around some of the programs that we are facilitating, but really being mindful that Canada's aid, or what Pierre says is going to cut, really is benefiting Canada. And so when we cut it, we cut domestic our domestic abilities as well. In 2023, Canada spent, and I put this on LinkedIn, so if anybody wants to read it, they can read the actual document. But in 2023, Canada reported $8 billion in official development assistance. But 20% of that comes back into Canada for domestic refugee resettlement. And so if that is cut, then to Judy and Vasanthi's point and Jim's point, like what happens there when we think about our debt, the aid that goes out, but the debt that these countries have to pay back into for their, like Haiti, for their liberation, that debt goes back to the wealthiest OECD countries. So we have to be very mindful of the traps that are being set, and the positions of us versus them, and the clawback of this aid that we're giving, the clawbacks of helping, especially the most vulnerable in our communities and the most vulnerable in the global South. The notion that would be okay is not okay. If we don't have the humanity, our collective humanity, to support each other domestically and internationally, then what are we here for? And at the end of the day, I think it's a very dangerous and irresponsible philosophy. And I think, to Judy's point, Canadians really need to quote Judy, to quote Rihanna, we need to pull up. We need to, this is not about just organizations. It's about the people on this, not just the people on this call, but beyond. It's about us deciding as Canadians that we're going to join women-led advocacy groups that are actively fighting against economic injustice. We have to call out bad policies publicly, loudly, unapologetically. And let me tell you, I know that everybody's not a Celina who will tweet at a prime minister or tweet at a leader of a G7 country. I get that. But there are ways that we could work together, in the quiet ways and the very disruptive ways, to actually have a strategy of disruption. We need to support women-owned businesses, especially those who have been often historically marginalized. We need community backing now more than ever. And y'all, you need to get political. When we talk about the fact that everything that Black women or women of color, Indigenous women do is political, the rest of y'all need to step up, because decisions that affect your financial future are being made whether you're at the table or not. And those ones that are sitting back saying, well, it's not happening to me, y'all need to use your power and your enormous privilege to kick up dust as well. The goal isn't about just resisting. It's about rebuilding an economy that actually works for everyone, so that everybody can not just survive, but to thrive. And that only happens when we stop waiting for permission and start stealing back our rights in our democracy.
Okay, thank you, Celina. All right. I'm going to ask a slightly different, and unless, Jim, do you want to weigh in on any of that?
PK, I'm just agog at how inspiring and bang on all those speakers are. I couldn't add anything. Thank you very much for your courage.
All right, thank you. All right, well, with everyone's permission then, I want to move us to a slightly kind of up note and ask each of our panelists if you could share, is the news all bad? And are you noticing anything that's really inspiring you right now? What are you seeing out there that is happening? Are there some opportunities that everyone on the webinar today should know about, organizations they might want to follow, join? Where are you seeing the light? Well, okay.
Y'all need to stop. Okay. Like, I feel like you're doing this on purpose.
Sorry, Celina's doing. Okay.
No, Judy, go ahead, please. Go ahead.
No, you go.
So I just joined as the executive director for the Canadian Community Economic Development Network. And so this is not a plug just for the organization, but for a plug for the network and the social economy, everybody that works within that sector. While a lot of us could think of this moment, and I think Judy touched on it earlier, think of this moment and go, oh my God, what is happening? This is the opportunity of a lifetime. Solution to this problem. And I say y'all, I just got here. I've been here for about a minute. What I was like 2 months ago, I started working in the sector. Y'all have been doing this work. It is time to develop a strategy where We build coalitions. We heard that before from Judy. Build those coalitions. When I worked with Neurological Health Charities Canada, it was during the Harper years when we know Harper wasn't funding health and he wasn't funding research. And we came together as 26, we started off as 9, grew to 26 neurological based organizations. Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, Rett syndrome, epilepsy, small ones, big ones, stroke, heart and stroke. We came together and said we needed to understand risk factors, health services, impact and scope of neurological conditions, especially on women caregivers in Canada. And we got $15 million from Harper. The power of coalition, the power of solidarity, the power of dialogue, not debate. I'm not here to say, yes, you're wrong, no, I'm right, yes and no. That's debating. Dialogue says, what can we find common ground on and work together to achieve that, whether you're a big organization or a small organization. This is no time for I'm from Big Island and you're from Small Island. No time for that. We have to come together in a real moment of solidarity and decide that we are going to do something different. And if NHCC or Neurological Health Charities Canada could have gotten $15 million under a Harper government, then look, we're beyond that now. We could do that. This is a moment like no other for us to come together and decide that we are going to shape our own destiny, shape our own future, and actually leave no one behind.
Thank you, Celina. I have a feeling someone's going to jump on that as well.
Okay, so when I heard Celina was coming, I thought, oh, it'd be good to have a liberal here. But I didn't think I'd agree with absolutely everything she said, you see? So like she was the parliamentary secretary to Trudeau. Okay, my mind is blown, right? So even I, who argue all the time to be not sectarian, can be so pleasantly surprised in a conversation. I agree with everything you're saying. My inspiration this last year has been in the Palestinian resistance movement and the student movement. I know some people on the call be upset by that, but sorry, but we don't need to agree on that. A good point. We don't need to agree on that to work together on this. But I am and have been for my whole life pretty well an anti-Zionist, a Jew. I'm a Jew and I'm an anti-Zionist. So I work with the pro-Palestinian movement, and the Palestinian student occupation, in particular on U of T, was one of the most beautiful experiences I've ever had in my whole life. Because, they had, like, I'll just tell you the one story, which is I go into the library. They had a tent that was a library, and there was a library at Occupy too, so that wasn't such a big deal. But over here was spiritual books, and the Muslim books were right next to the Jewish books. And then right next to it were the LGBTQ and feminist books, right? Like, it was amazing. And the whole site was like that, right? Incredible diversity of every kind, with young people who are the children of refugees and immigrants who have now the privilege of having been educated in the North. And I think these are the people, and maybe they're all in this room, they're right in this room or on this panel, I don't know. These are the people who are going to lead us into the future, because they have the privilege of being here, but they know the suffering of their people, whether at home or here, right? And I think that we need that, because those of us who are privileged, and I'm enormously privileged for all kinds of reasons, I'm so privileged that people care what I have to say, even though I'm almost 80 years old. That's how privileged I am. So is that we need to be reminded of what we really believe and what we really care about. And we're only going to do that if we work together, just like we're doing right here. So I'm very moved by this panel discussion too, because we're all agreeing. And we didn't set it up for us all to agree. So anyway, yeah, so that inspires me.
Okay, that's a really great, is the news all bad? Not necessarily. There are bright lights happening across the country and in various spaces. Does anyone else want to add to that? And if not, I will open it up to the floor
I just
to
want to
ask
add
some
about
questions. Sure.
I just want to add about Justicia's work, and I want to say that I want to give a little bit of a background so as to not romanticize the part. So the workers that we work with, a lot of them come under the Seasonal Agricultural Work Program, and this was established in 1966 for Caribbean workers. And at the time it was established, it was stated in the parliament that this is only for Caribbean workers, and the subjecting Europeans or white immigrants to such conditions, and I quote, would be tantamount to enslavement. And that system has continued from 1966 to this day with hardly any changes. And it ensures that these workers come for 8 months a year and then they go back, work for 8 months a year and then they go back. So I just want to say, give this background to talk about how difficult it is to organize in the group. And then in the late 1990s and 2000s, it was expanded to include Guatemalan indigenous populations who had been displaced in the Guatemalan genocide. Okay, and the women workers that we're talking about, they face extreme exploitation, discrimination, and high levels of control over their bodies. When they can use the washroom, when can they go to the grocery store to buy feminine hygiene products, and so on and so forth. And there have been a few cases of sexual violence that we know of, like those against Thai and Caribbean women in this very famous case called Prestige, and Guatemalan women at Golden Eagle Blueberry Farm in BC, which was about a couple of years back. But these cases are so rare as the system is designed to silence them. In fact, this program has been praised by Trump and US Republicans. It seemed to be as the model for US to emulate in their fight against undocumented migration, because it provides so much control over workers. So just to say that Canada doesn't need the US to teach it how to exploit racialized and indigenous women, it has been perfecting this for decades. But I think the question then comes as to how do we organize with them? And we see these stories about how we worked with the Prestige workers. In fact, how the Prestige women themselves organized. We're talking about 80, 90 women who are under precarious status, who decided that enough is enough, who worked together for months on end against a system that was so brutal that it started with 81 or 80 workers who started the legal case, and there were only 3 people left at the end who won this massive legal settlement. And the same thing for these Guatemalan workers. So it was really about going every day to them and sitting with them and working with them in this process. And last year, in the last few months, in fact, it just got done today, you must have seen about the international students who have formed this encampment in Brampton to fight against these policies. And these were again women students, girl students who had just who are in extremely precarious status, but who are brave enough to sit over there or near the highway where people were heaping racial abuses at them, but continued with their encampment. And Judy spoke about the student encampment and about the abuses that they, I was part of the student encampment, I supported the student encampment in Windsor as well. And the everyday abuse that frontline solidarity and frontline activism, that people who engage in frontline solidarity and frontline activism face, I mean, it's just so much. So I do think for that this is the time to step up and to actually understand. And for Justicia, as I've said before, it's not about these tariffs. It's not about US. It's not about Trump. These are all interlocking systems of power that have long oppressed racialized and migrant women. And that includes, the legal exceptions that have long been in place that deny people in precarious immigration status right to healthcare, right to employment insurance, right to housing. And so this is part and parcel of it, and fighting imperialism altogether. So in a way, it is, I think, making these politicians less important in many ways, making those people in power less important, because our voices are better spent in these places where we can build in solidarity and build community. because I think working with migrant workers, what we don't realize, what Canadians don't realize is how much they're excluded from being part of the community. And it is working with them in community, I think, that is really one of the most powerful ways in which we can attack this. And we see that in large scale social movements all over the world against the rising neoliberalism, the rising, not just, I mean, it's risen so much that there is no end now. So, and the rising racism and so on. So this is a time to be part of the movement. And I think there are opportunities all over.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that so much.
PK,
you.
can I throw one thing
Yeah,
in there
I'm hoping
in terms
you
of
do.
a hopeful initiative, although it's a very, very first step. There is a group of folks who've come together and started a thing called Pledge for Canada. And it was involving some, some progressive MPs and the Council of Canadians and trade unions and feminists and others. It's on the web. If you Google Pledge for Canada, you come to the site where it's hosted, which is Engagement Canada. But look for Pledge for Canada. There's a nice statement there that I think is progressive but unifying. And if folks think that's worth signing on to, add your name. They've gotten 70,000 names already just in the last 10 days. And that will be a good building block for that movement that we were talking about that we need to see. So check out Pledge for Canada if you have a moment.
Great. That's a really great suggestion. Thank you so much, Jim. Okay, I've been sort of reviewing the questions in the Q&A here and pulling off a couple of common themes. So we may not address your question in and of itself because there are a few common themes here. And so I'm going to try to answer all 14 of them or help us get to most of them by grouping things together. So a theme that comes up on a couple of different questions here is about how we rebalance things. All of our panelists have talked about the weakness of the left. And so Lena asks, how is the rise of the multiracial right playing a role in the current context? And what are some strategies we can align on and work in solidarity on to try to stave off a similar political outcome in the US? And I know we talked a lot about coalitions, and but maybe we could expand on that a little bit. What other strategies, and we can expand on coalitions as well, but how do we pull the left back together? Because it's a vacuum.
I don't think there's a multiracial right. I think there's some people of color who are on the right. That doesn't make a multiracial right. I don't know what other people think, but yeah, I mean, of course, there were always, like when we were in the abortion fight, there were women in the right fighting against us. There's always women fighting against us. And in the feminist movement, they always put up a woman who doesn't agree with us. Like Barbara McDougall said, well, why is NAC so important? I belong to the YWCA and I don't support NAC. There's always people like that. I don't know if Celina or Vasanthi have some other thing, but I don't see a big rise of racialized people supporting the right. A big rise of there are too many women and too many racialized people who support the right, but it's always been like that. So I don't really see anything different now. I mean, sure, they put them up front, when they're doing a press conference, they put the people of color behind them. Doesn't mean it's a multiracial right. I don't know. Am I wrong? That's how I see it.
I think it was Amy Caesar who said that colonization could not have happened without the consent of at least some of the colonized. So, I think he said the colonized, but I think that is that's always the case, because I think it's really important to understand how power works, and that it's an hierarchy, right? That's how racial capitalism works. It's not that it's a binary. There's a whole spectrum, and there is the way this fighting for resources and this divide and control happens is by co-opting some people onto this side, so that there's always somebody who you can oppress. So I think that dynamic is always there. And I think the problem that has happened in the left over the years, I mean, the reason why Justicia was formed was because the unions, the left unions had for many decades a very anti-migrant sentiment, that this was supposed to be migrant workers are taking away Canadian jobs, and very much a very traditional welfare state, a white welfare state approach to immigration. So, and now that has changed. Now we see so many broad-based unions. For example, for the international students at Brampton, I mean, there were so many union activists, left activists who came out in support. And I think that even with those who are fighting against the Gazan genocide, there is a deeper understanding right now as to how colonial structures, capitalist structures, and racial structures are all intertwined. That we cannot do this traditional way of fighting on a one issue basis. In fact, my big fear of this Trump issue is that we are going to see it as a singular crisis, and that we are not going to see it's a distraction. In fact, the discussion about the focus just on tariffs, it's a distraction from the systemic issues that have always been there, that have in fact created the Trumps and Poilievres of this world. So if we really have to go into it, we have to fight all the structures together. So, and it's not a question of people being this side or that side, because there are people of all sorts on all sides, on all parts of power. I mean, every person has some form of privilege and some form of oppression. And I think that when there's a fight for resources, we find that people like to align with power, and that's what we are seeing.
Okay, great. All right, thank you so much, Vasanthi. Go ahead.
Sorry, can I add to that? Because I want to honor that question, because and to Vasanthi's point, I think there is possibly a rise or an increase in number, or people are just being more vocal about being on both sides, being conservative or being on that side of the spectrum. And they possibly have reason to do so. I mean, I left as a liberal and sat as an independent with only a few months left of my term, to send a very powerful message that you cannot continue to disenfranchise a group of people who have continuously supported you and taken advantage of you. So you have a group of I'll talk about Black community, for example, because I feel like I could have some liberties here, but you have Black communities have consistently, for generations, voted liberal. Your mom voted liberal, your grandmother voted liberal, because Trudeau opened the door for the liberals to come here. And so we continue to vote liberal. But at the same time that you're doing that, you're taking advantage of those same communities. You have Trudeau taking kneeling and taking a fist after George Floyd, but holding the pen on a Black class action lawsuit that he will not settle. You have boiled water advisories that are not going away. We still have 28 of them. Like, give me a break. You want people to just sit and blindly just say that we are going to continue to support? We need to hold to account. And so while I don't want people to vote against their own self-interest, we still need to be able to stand up and say, you know what? We're not just going to accept that your basic is good enough for us anymore. We went in the 42nd Parliament with a majority. I was the only Black woman elected out of 338 members of Parliament in the 42nd Parliament. I was excluded from so many meetings that had to do with community activism. Why? Because I was too loud and I was too activisty for the liberals. So I mean, like, I want to honor that, because as long as the left continues to walk around with its dentures on the side table, then people are going to continue to leave. We have some real serious issues right now. In the US, Roe versus Wade, why wasn't that codified? Like, there's just so many things that you're like, give your head a shake, liberals. You're not in this position because, because of only Trump. You're in this position because your spine got lost somewhere.
Mhm.
And so figure out, libs, figure out where you're at, because they're going to continue leaving, and we can't afford for that to happen.
Oh my gosh, I think I'm supposed to be a moderator and be like neutral, but I can't help it. I don't know if I'm supposed to do jazz hands on things, but I decided, yeah, I see a lot of response to that. We're at 5:20, so it's also part of my job to keep things going here. I want to give Nancy some time to kind of close this out near the end. So I just want to invite our panelists to answer one question with just one thing. And that is, imagine you were an entrepreneur right now and you were having a business. What would be the one thing that you, as a business owner and as a human in the community, what would be the one thing, one step? Because we have a lot of people asking, what is the call to action? So one call that, what do you want people on this panel or on this webinar today? One thing they can do, like right as soon as they leave here today. What would you suggest? So I'll start with you, Jim. What would you say? You're an entrepreneur and you're going to leave here and you're going to do something. What is that thing?
Well, you're an entrepreneur, but you're also a human being, and I've heard that loud and clear from CAN WCC. So I'm going to emphasize the human being end of it, which is go out and be loud and proud. Sign that pledge for Canada. Sign any other pledge for a fairer and inclusive society, and make your voice heard that way. In Donald Trump's world, democracy works $1, one vote. That's why he had all those billionaires in the front row at his inauguration. And in our desired world, it's one person, one vote. So go out and have your voice and your vote heard.
Okay, thank you. Vasanthi, what is the one thing you can tell everybody go out and do right now?
Well, you can do it right now, actually. And I think as somebody who teaches kind of a homework, but at least consider, I think, rethinking borders and Canada first. That's what I would say. At least think about it. It may seem scary, but just think about it. This whole narrative. That's all I would say.
Thank you. Okay, over to you, Judy. What is the one thing everybody should walk away with and do?
I think that as entrepreneurs, the question of mutual support, of benefit community support, I think to talk to people in your community, to talk to people who you're selling to or working with, and to find out how they're relating and how they can use assistance. In the States right now, there's a whole movement for, unfortunately, the word mutual benefit or mutual support, that progressive people should be reaching out in their communities to support those who don't have enough to live on, or don't, not in a charitable way, but in a working together way, the way that Vasanthi was talking about. And to find out the groups in your area. Somebody in the chat was raising the whole question of rural. And this is a problem in Canada, like the left's never related to rural areas, the Farmers Union, other than the Farmers Union. And anyway, so yeah, so I'd say find out what's going on in your community and get involved would be an important thing to do.
Thank you. And I'm going to go to Celina for the last word on this, and only to just mention in the chat, a number of people have put a lot of organizations on Canada Project. I see one, twostep.ca. So there's some right here. Celina?
So I'm going to shout out Sam from On Canada. I'm going to shout out Stacy, who worked with me in my constituency office. So shout out to everybody who's here. So I would say, let's not forget our collective humanity here. This is not just about Buy Canada, like B-U-Y. This is a Buy Canada, B-Y. And if we forget our communities, to Judy's point, if we forget our humanity, to Jim's point, if we forget the fact that we're not just buying in terms of dollars and cents, but we have people who are going to be left behind, who are most vulnerable, who don't have the capacity and don't have the strength, like, let's just not forget that we could do better as community than we can do individually. So Let's continue to work in solidarity with each other and not forget those who are at the nexus of climate change, pandemics, geopolitical issues, who are going to be left behind. We cannot at this moment forget our collective humanity.
All right, thank
And
you
it's
so
mutual
much.
aid, the word I was looking for. Heather Wood put it in the chat, mutual aid.
Right, mutual aid. All right, thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over to Nancy, the CEO and founder of Canadian Women's Chamber of Commerce, which had celebrated its 7th year anniversary and has come so far from that day of 5 people in a room, or maybe just Nancy in a room, I don't know. And to thank our panel and also some closing remarks. Nancy?
Thank you, Petra. Thank you so much. So KWCC is so proud to have hosted this panel today, and I appreciate everyone for joining us and spending time to have this really important discussion. KWCC is a national organization that works to advance gender and economic equity. And here at KWCC, we are not afraid of difficult discussions. In fact, we believe that these are the only discussions worth having. We want to organize and engage in critical conversations that center and amplify diverse voices and women's lived experiences. And we need your support to continue our work. Today, KWCC is launching its Momentum membership, membership specifically designed to support KWCC's growth and long-term sustainability. This membership is open to all genders and is not restricted to entrepreneurs. We want to include everybody in building Canada's only chamber of commerce that represents women and gender diverse voices. If the Momentum membership is not for you or not for you at this time, you can also join KWCC for free as a community member and stay in the know with our newsletters and stay connected that way. Thank you so much to all of our panelists and everyone who attended today. Thank you so much again to everybody. I feel really inspired despite the heavy times. So much of what I heard today just makes me feel so much lighter, being in a space and holding space for people that feel the same way, that have the same values that I do. I feel like we are, it is possible to move things forward together. Thank you and have a great rest of your day.